Hello everyone, and welcome to the octo-finals of the World Championship 2017. In opening government, we have UQDSC. Opening opposition, we have IITA. In closing government, we have Cambridge A. And in closing opposition, we have Yale A. I'm Yair, I work here. They with me are Andre, Paul, Rebecca, and Mo. We hope it's going to be a great debate and are happy to call upon the Prime Minister.
Panel, in this debate, the government are happy for you to practice your religion in private, to pray to whatever God you see fit, to worship and engage in your religious traditions. But also, a government panel, we recognise that the basis on which you do those things is not only unproven, but unprovable. And what we'll tell you is that those religions sell individuals a worldview which we tell you promises those individuals certain things from spiritual fulfillment to salvation when they ultimately die. We tell you those are promised to those individuals on no basis, and we tell you that those narratives not only prey on vulnerable individuals in our society, but equally are exclusionary of certain groups which those religions have prejudiced views against. On that basis, we would ban all public advocacy of any form of religious views. We tell you that looks like banning public speech, which has the purpose of converting individuals to believe in that religion. Obviously, that includes things like handing out flyers about your religion. It includes banning things like speech or advocacy, which is intended to convert individuals or change their minds such that they are more likely to subscribe to that religion or to have a more favourable view of that religion in the future. To be clear, we are still happy for individuals to practice their religions in the privacy of their own homes or in places of worship, or in fact, no thank you, if that includes some sorts of public behaviours such as wearing certain things in public, so wearing a hijab, we are happy for that to happen as well. We're also obviously happy for individuals to subscribe to or choose a religion, but we want that to be an organic process, untainted by advocacy on the part of individuals who already subscribe to that religion. Two questions in this speech. Firstly, why we think this is an appropriate restriction on your freedom of speech, and secondly, why this is important for religious freedom. So firstly, let's talk about why this is an important restriction on freedom of speech. We tell you that freedom of religion means the freedom to practice your religion, to do things like worship and engage with your religious tradition. We tell you that's very important. But we tell you that religious freedom, no thank you, does not necessarily include your freedom to then attempt to convert other people to that religion. Even to the extent you subscribe to a faith such as being of a Mormon religion, and that might form part of your religion. We tell you that that part, importantly, impinges on the right of other people, not to hear that speech, not to have to engage with that religion. For that reason, we tell you that your religious freedom ends at the point at which you have to attempt to change the behaviour of other people. We say that goes beyond the negative right that you should have not to have your religion interfered with. Why do we think that's an acceptable curtailment on your freedom to publicly speak about that religion? Firstly, because we tell you that the basis of the claims upon which religion is based, such as the existence of a God, the existence of heaven, the existence of hell, are not only unproven, but inherently unable to be proven. That means you're never able to accurately sell someone a worldview which you definitely know is correct, because you can't say with any authority that heaven or hell does exist. If only because so many different religions make so many different claims, we don't think that any one of them can be taken to be ultimately and objectively correct. We say that the claims on which you base your advocacy for that religion are inherently unproven. But equally, you are selling on that basis, on that unproven basis, people a worldview which asks them to engage in certain behaviours, to do things like give their time and give their money to that religious cause. We say that's the inherency of all religions, is that they ask something of their subscribers. We say that when you publicly advocate for that religion, you ask that time or that money or that behaviour of that person on a basis which is fraudulent or at least unable to be proven. Because we say that restricts individuals' ability to live in a world, to know the truth about that world, and to make decisions about their behaviour and what they do with their time on an informed basis. We say that's an unacceptable containment of those people's freedom of religion. Because equally, panel, recognise that freedom of religion equally means freedom from religion. And we say that when you are forced to live in a world where you are forced to hear about and see religious practices, where your behaviour is influenced by claims which are being made, which again we recognise are unproven claims, that limits your ability to live in that world free from religious beliefs and in the absence of those religious beliefs. Particularly because we advocate that in public places, at the very least, secularity should be observed and individuals should be free to behave in a way that they feel is untainted or at least not influenced by others' religious beliefs. I'll take everything.
If your metric for acceptable speech is outcomes, then will you also ban public political advocacy of right-wing groups that seek to limit the number of immigrants that countries take in?
Well, the basis on which we want to limit this speech is that it is inherently unproven, and the claims which are made are unproven, and not only unproven, but unable to be proven, at least to the extent that different religions contradict each other and make claims about things which can never objectively be known to be true. That is not true of things like political speech. We tell you that's different. But why is this important for individuals' freedom? First, let me tell you that prima facie, a lot of this speech can be very confronting and very annoying to people that do not subscribe to that religion, and indeed do not subscribe to a religion at all. That looks like things like religious advocacy, which includes advocacy against abortion, which we tell you is often very graphic and very confronting speech. You as an individual should be able to live in a world without that when you do not subscribe to those beliefs. You should not have to see the public presence of those views. But even when those views are not extreme, it still forces you to think of religions which at times are extremely exclusionary to certain groups of people. You should not have to see the public presence of Christian religions if you are a person who is LGBTI and is inherently excluded by those institutions. We tell you that's not acceptable. But equally, for the people who are converted or at least have their behaviour changed by these groups, why do we think that this is unacceptable? Because we tell you that often the people who are most affected by this speech are very vulnerable people, and that most religions are offering something to their followers in the form of either spiritual salvation and afterlife, etc. We tell you that those narratives are most attractive to people who are struggling in some way, whether that be struggling financially, whether that be struggling with an illness or a mental illness. We tell you that religions are designed to prey upon those people because they are the people most likely to want what religion offers them. The problem is that those people are sold a worldview which is either unproven or in some way fraudulent, and that it cannot be proven that a religion can definitively offer you any form of afterlife or spiritual salvation. That leads individuals to do things like giving their time, giving their money, or changing their daily behaviour on the basis of what they think they can get from that religion. Even to the extent that this debate is about spiritual fulfilment and individuals finding some peace of mind spiritually, we will tell you we'd rather a world in which those individuals were accurately informed about the realities of that world and about the things that they could expect, as opposed to carrying out behaviours that they would not otherwise have carried out on the basis of attempting to achieve an outcome which that religion has sold them, but which can never be objectively provided to them. On that basis, we tell you, and because a lot of those claims are inherently exclusionary to certain groups of people in society, that there is no basis for this speech to exist, we're happy to propose.
We thank the previous speaker very much and are happy to call upon the Leader of Opposition.
I think it's ridiculous that we can say we want something to be followed and in private, but not in public, especially when that public identity and the private identity are so hard to distinguish. From opening opposition, we will tell you why this is an intrinsic part of a lot of religions and why this does not constitute a legitimate, this is an illegitimate ban on free speech. And then I'm going to talk to you about the benefits of allowing public advocacy. Right? Before that, let's be very clear on things you're willing to stand by in opening opposition. You're We're willing to stand by banning hate speech, which actively tells you to go kill or hurt other people. We're also willing to stand by banning like Ponzi donations for religion, saying that, oh, if you get this much, if you give us this much money, you will get grace of God. We're okay with having those kinds of Ponzi schemes banned. Right? Before I move on to my substantive, let's get opening government out of the way. The standard they had for speech and banning speech is that it is untrue. So what? Like, I think most of the American presidential campaign was based on lies in the first place, right? You don't think that's a standard by which you can ban public speech. Secondly, they said that it's untrue, so it's illegitimate. We don't know why something being untrue is something that's so problematic, given that there are a lot of benefits and it's meaningful to a lot of people. That's not a standard for banning speech. The second thing they said is that they want freedom from people seeing religion, right? People in public spaces should be able to not see religion. We think that's an absurd metric, right? Firstly, you don't get freedom from like not wanting to see black people if you're racist, right? In public spaces, freedom means you have to engage with things you're uncomfortable with. Those two metrics on speech do not stand. What are the metrics for banning free speech and why does this not fall under? To prove that I shouldn't be allowed to say something, which is very dear to me, you have to show first direct harm to individuals as a matter of me saying that thing, and secondly, you have to show that there's a power imbalance in speech, both of which we don't think exist. Firstly, a large part of individual identity and specifically religious identity means supporting my individual identity in public, right? So, for example, for like Islamic religion, having the namaz in public is a very strong part of the religious identity, something they ban on their side. So they can't have loudspeakers in mosques on their side, although explicitly in the Quran it said that mosques should preach their religion through loudspeakers, like to as many people as they can. Right? Moreover, we think advocates and believers of religion very sincerely believe in like spreading the word of God, which means that they very strongly believe the word of God actually benefits a lot of people's lives. Which means they actually want people to go and say that, see, like God can do great things for you. Which means it's a very large part of their individual beliefs to actually believe and spread the word of God. Which means like it's important to them to spread it in public. Secondly, on harm. The reason this doesn't cause any harm is because allowing other people to advocate for their religion doesn't like cause any harm to me listening to it. Sure, it could make me a bit uncomfortable to listen to other people advocate for their religion in public, but I'm unlikely to understand why that's a harm, given that either A, I start believing in that religion, which might, as I'll argue, be a good thing. But secondly, if I don't start believing in that religion, I don't know what the harm that these people are willing to stand behind is, right? I think at the point at which the advocacy we're talking about is, for example, like TV shows, which, like, for example, TV shows which portray a religion, for example, having namaz in public, we're not sure what the harm of hearing a loudspeaker saying that Allah is great really is. Thirdly, on power imbalance, right? If power imbalance indeed exists, we think it's much more pernicious when it exists without free speech. So if there is a conservative society which has like religious beliefs indoctrinated either into like the state policies or in the fact that the mosque or the church is very, very powerful in those societies, most people are pushed towards religion either through their family or through their local churches or mosques, right? We don't think that, we think what we do is correct the power imbalance in these kinds of societies and allow other religions to put forward their beliefs and say, okay, this is what, like, this is the other alternative word of God and the other way you can get salvation. But more importantly, not only other religions, right? I think modern versions of that religion itself can also push for their version of that religion, while what they do is trap people who are like the most vulnerable on their side of the house, people who believe in conservative views, to those conservative views by not allowing political advocacy by moderate religious groups on their side of the house. Before I talk to you about what the benefits of this and why you need more questioning of religion in public forum, I'll take those in.
So just to clarify, are you happy to allow religious advocacy, which either tells people that because of something they do they are going to hell, or that says that venerated figures were frauds, adulterers, liars, etc.?
Okay, so if you're going to argue against heaven and hell, you're arguing against religion itself. So we think that firstly, like if you say that the problem with religion is it tells people to go to hell, that's an argument against any religion, and you probably want to ban religion as a whole. We think this debate is about speech and whether it's legitimate to have that kind of speech in public. Okay, why does more questioning in public forums happen? Why that's a good thing? We pointed out often there's intrinsic support for majority religion. For example, Zakir Naik was recently a huge issue that happened because he had political religious advocacy through a TV channel, and some terrorists said, and that's the best case scenario on ground, right? Some terrorists said that they were influenced by Zakir Naik, who was a religious advocate on TV. We think on the comparative, even in that best case for them, the reason we are better is that hundreds of Zakir Nayaks exist inside mosques, hundreds of really conservative religious leaders exist inside churches who tell a lot of things like abortion is sin. What having Zakir Naik in public saying those things mean is that you know exactly what these people are saying. You don't know what's happening inside a mosque or a church, but you do know when Zakir Naik says the same thing in public on TV. Which means, one, moderate Muslims know exactly what to respond to and exactly what is influencing people in a negative way. Secondly, like atheists and other religious group members also know what to respond to and how to convince people to not get extrematized on their side of the house. Which means, on the comparative, you have more moderation of religion on our side when you can have public advocacy for that. Thirdly, right, we think religion is very good for people, and their argument is basically anti-religion. Given they concede that it's most attractive to people struggling in some form of way, we think that's an extremely good thing to allow those people some salvation, even if it's through a lie or through the word of God. Given that the hijab is extremely empowering to women who wear them, we think often public expression of your religion is great for people who are, as they concede, struggling in some form of way to get salvation, right? And fourthly, and my DLO will expand on this, we think provision of essential services that religions do give is often linked to advocacy. This means that you tell people that join our religion because these are the nice things we do. We make schools, we give hospitals, we give healthcare. These are the multiple reasons why you should join our religion. For you to be able to do that, you have to actually give schools and give healthcare. Which means, for example, when the church goes into Africa where there's no state and gives just public advocacy, they also give services like healthcare and food when none other alternatives exist. Because this is an unconstitutional ban of free speech, because religion is important and advocacy of that religion is important, we're very proud.
We thank the previous speaker very much for having a call upon the Deputy Prime Minister.
Speaker, to be clear, when a group of people from religion positions themselves outside an abortion clinic or a gay nightclub or even just a sex store and yells at nearby passers-by who walk into that store or interact with that place that they are going to hell because of it, they're probably not breaking hate speech laws because they're merely talking about their own religion and talking about hell. But the effect that they have on the vulnerable queer people who go to that nightclub or the women who walk into that abortion clinic is exactly the same as the one that might be used by someone who participates in hate speech. So when opening opposition concedes that they do not believe that they do believe that hate speech should be restricted and they do not believe that people are meaningfully harmed by this speech, they are wrong. The effect is identical and equivalently problematic. That is why we oppose it. 2 points in this speech. Firstly, on freedom of religion, and secondly, on how people meaningfully interact with this religious material. On freedom of religion, we say that your freedom of religion is an individual right that you get to practice on your own. You do not get to impose it upon other people. You do not get to convince other people that they should participate in the exact same way that you participate in it. They say that is a restriction on some people's religion already because some religions require you to practice in public. We note that they already stand for some curtailment of religion, presumably, and that they oppose some hate speech, which might be, like said, by religions, and maybe they stand by the banning of other religious practices like female genital mutilation. So we say that at some point you do curtail people's freedom of religion at the point at which it affects other people, and that's something that we were happy to restrict. Why then do we restrict this speech? Because let's note, the reason religions go out and they advocate that certain people should join the religion is not for fun, it is because they convince people and ask people to change their minds on the basis of a fraudulent claim. If you believe very strongly in the freedom of religion, as the opening opposition seemed to, it is surely inadequate that while walking down the street on a day on which you felt particularly vulnerable and you saw one specific religion engaging in a certain form of proselytization, that you became a member of that religion. That is not a meaningful choice because it is not a choice that considered a range of different religions. It is not a choice that considered the different ways that that religion could impact your life. It is a choice based on a single interaction with a single person, which we think is inadequate given the extent to which religion is likely to dictate your life and dictate your behavior. And this material is also applicable to people within religions because they point out that most people join religions because their family is a member or their friends are a member. We would suggest that it is hard to question that religion when you see people on the street every day engaging in discussions with you, and you're going out there and trying to convince people. You're less likely to question it to the extent that you need to. The important point to take away from this, Madam Speaker, is that if freedom of religion is an incredibly important right, it is not something that can be made on the basis of a quick interaction in public. And to protect that freedom of religion, you need to find that religion yourself. You cannot be coerced by an exciting narrative or an untrue narrative. It needs to be a personal decision that is not influenced by outside factors. The last point that we observe here is that we think freedom of religion requires freedom from religion. I'll get to closing in a second, which is to say, if you feel oppressed by a religion, as many people do, you cannot have that religion in a public place reminding you constantly of that form of oppression. Closing.
Can you give me a single principal difference between being coerced into a new religion on the street and being coerced into a new religion 20 feet next to it inside a church building without relying on philosophy that, by the way, also can't be proven by your side?
Obvious reason is that you chose to walk into the church, right? Like, firstly, the average person doesn't need to interact with it. And secondly, and probably more importantly, like, that implies that you were seeking out religion. You weren't just feeling really upset one day and looking for something more in your life. You walked into a specific church and made an active decision, as opposed to having a decision imposed upon you. Again, note, the reason religions do that is precisely because they convince people to change their minds. A person who walks into a church has already made some extent of a decision. We're much happier with that. Second point in this speech about how people meaningfully interact with this material. Firstly, as I pointed out in my introduction, we think that hate speech laws are inadequate to prevent people from feeling miserable about this. Firstly, because they're often not imposed appropriately, particularly in the developing world where we think even more people are religious. But secondly, because this speech can serve as a proxy for exactly the same things that make hate speech problematic, which is to say, if you are a gay person and they are protesting near a gay club or in a gay district and telling the average person there that because they live in a neighborhood, they are going to hell, then you feel the same oppression, you feel the same misery, that all of society is against you. And even if you do not actually interact with them and you do not hear them speak, the very fact that that religion that you feel oppresses you, that you feel makes you miserable, is in society and is tolerated by society, is something that you know that you hate. If you were sexually abused by a clergy person, if you're a woman who had an abortion and was very traumatized by that, knowing that society actively tolerates it and sees it very regularly, and it's a common part of society that happens in public places, is very upsetting to you. And that's particularly true because religions often themselves have savior complexes, which means they target the people who are most likely to not be behaving as that religion would like people who are queer, like people who are getting abortions, which is why this speech is most likely to affect those most vulnerable people and upset them the most. That's a really important element of this debate. But secondly, this speech itself preys on vulnerable people, because we don't think that average people, when they walk down the street on a normal day, make a decision about which religion they're going to participate in, because that, it's a groundbreaking and really meaningful decision. We think that that decision is therefore made by people who are in a difficult time of their lives, like because they are mentally ill, like because they are particularly poor at a certain time. And the advocacy that the opening opposition talked about, and the sort of charities they engage in, particularly causes people to engage in that. And as a consequence, they make a decision quickly about the religion that is going to define a huge portion of their life. But that means that they don't get a meaningful interpretation of that religion, and they don't make a meaningful choice about how they want to engage within that religion, which is a really big problem. The last thing that I want to add to some extent substantively here is that we think that religion at the moment substantially affects the character of societies, which means that in Western nations, the celebration of Christmas often has very Christian elements. Similar things are true in Islamic societies. We think that the presence of non-secular groups in public spaces makes individuals feel like that society is a strongly religious one, and it makes that society have a religious character. We think that makes it harder for people to opt out of religion without feeling like they're not only opting out of that religion, but they're also opting out of the character of their society and the average way that people believe in that society. And that's why it's important that public spaces have a secular element so that people can make their own choices and their own decisions. Madam Speaker, if we were happy to ban hate speech in this debate, as the opening opposition was happy to, you had to recognise that religious speech often upset people in precisely the same ways. That's why people had to be able to opt out of it. More than proud to do
We thank the previous speaker very much and are happy to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
reason opening government falls out of this debate is because the burden on that side of the house was to prove that they want to ban public forms of religious speech in all the forms that it exists, right? Not certain specific instances that they have a problem with, but we'll respond to those in my speech, right? So two questions. Firstly, is there a standard for banning religious speech and does government bench meet it? And secondly, are there specific benefits of public political advocacy? But before that, note that in order to win this debate from opening opposition, we merely need to prove that there isn't a reasonable standard in order to ban this speech, right? We don't have the burden to prove that this speech is useful in the first place because we don't think that the reason you not ban speech is because it is useful, right? Because by that metric, a lot of the speeches in this room and perhaps in this tournament would be banned because at different instances of time, right? So that is not the way in which you view speech debate, right? So firstly, let's look at the standard for banning, right? First comment to make is notice that they ditched all of the arguments that they had in their first speech for banning this, right? Things like, the right of others not to hear. If other people don't want to engage with religious speech, just walk away, right? It's not like religious speech is everywhere and all around you such that you can't meaningfully opt out. If you're an LGBTQ person who feels offended by that religious speech, just go home, like it's fine, right? It's not so much of an issue, right? We think that there are other counter narratives to that, to that extent. So we don't really see how is it that this harm is so meaningful. Then the second thing that they say is that it's unproven, but on the other side, they couldn't also prove that it's unproven. So I guess as a house, we just take Pascal's waiver and let religion be there. But then they give us in their second speech a bit more of a scared defense, right? So what are the things they say? They say that, look at these bad religious people, they're outside abortion clinics and LGBTQ clubs and causing all of this harm, right? First, to the extent that they're causing actual harm that amounts to harassment of individuals who want to avail of the services, we think we can sit down, still regulate those forms of speech or expression, right? But secondly, if just feeling bad is a metric for banning speech, we think that religious people feel equally bad when you have a Charlie Hebdo comic that shows cartoons of Muhammad kissing Jesus, right? So we think in those instances, this very team would perhaps be willing to have an impassioned defense of free speech, and we're unsure why that doesn't work both ways. So merely feeling bad isn't enough of a reason to ban speech, right? But then secondly, they say that it's very, very coercive, and their analysis to this extent is some random, really sad person walking on the street, and a religious person comes up to him and says, hey, join my club, and your life is going to be great again, sit down, and then he gets pulled into it and goes down a pit of hell and exclusion, right? Look, this debate is about adults who can reasonably choose between different alternatives that they're offered at different points of time, right? So we're unsure, even if this really, really sad person is faced with this amazing advertisement for religion in public, why they're just going to jump into it and be trapped into it forever, right? So to the extent that they go to church 3, 4, 5 times and realize that it isn't quite panning out as was promised, they can reasonably opt out, right? There's no one who's holding a gunpoint to their head and saying that you have to be in this religion forever. So rubbish, right? It's not coercive to the extent that they would have you believe, right? And then finally they say, hate speech can't be regulated too well. So their brilliant solution is that ban all forms of religious speech to begin with, right? If your problem is that hate speech isn't regulated well enough in some instances, guess what? Regulate it better, right? But moreover, we think that to the extent that this hate speech exists in public is where you can be more cognizant of the fact that there exists a threat to certain minorities and certain communities that you are so worried about in this debate, right? Which means on our side of the house, we'd much rather have protesters outside LGBTQ clubs expressing the fact that they want all of these people to die, rather than be surprised by a shooter who walks into that club and shoots everyone, who's been radicalized in private, and you never knew that those opinions existed in the first place. Sit down because you banned them from existing in public spaces, right? Which means by the end of this bit of my speech, they haven't been able to prove to us what is a legitimate standard for banning. Opening government is out. Compare that to the analysis that we gave you in opening opposition as to why it doesn't meet this particular standard, right? First, we told you it's a very, very important part of religious people's lives, right? And they say in their first speech that they're going to ban the burqa and the hijab. Let's not let them get away with that, right? A ban on the burqa and other similar forms of public expression effectively means that you're taking away the freedom of movement of a lot of individuals who live in these communities, right? Because the most conservative of women in, let's say, Muslim communities, for whom you now ban the option of wearing the burqa, can't reasonably move around and go out in the same way in which they would be when they were allowed to follow their religion to its best possible way, right? But secondly, given that these people have been living their life in this way forever, we're unsure how they would be able to react to this change, given that they feel exposed and ultimately just something that they're not comfortable with in the absence of a burqa, right? Right? So what do we prove to you by this, right? And let's also deal with CG's POI on this idea of like, oh, religion tells people that hell exists. Look, that is a problem with religion in general. I mean, think ultimately people aren't so naive to just believe that hell exists and my life is really bad. We think people can choose, people are adults, people are all right. So before I move on to what are the specific benefits of allowing this speech to exist, I'll take close.
Aside from the fact you spent 2 minutes attacking something that G explicitly met down, can you explain what the real purpose of, for instance, extreme Christian groups handing out flyers saying that Muhammad was a fraud in majority Muslim areas is?
Okay. Right. So what are the benefits of religious speech existing, right? First, we tell you that it is an intrinsic part of religion to the extent that making religious speech available through TV, through sermons, through loudspeakers increases access to that religion, like, and the people of those religion itself, right? Which means that when you are like in an area surrounding a mosque, the purpose that you like broadcast that speech is so that people all around that area will have more access to that form of speech, right? But secondly, on moderating extremism, right? Look, here's the thing. The only way in which you can check and question extremism is when you know that those points of view exist in the first place, right? Which means at the point in which you have an ISIS or a Zakir Naik who says that Islam tells you to do all of these bad things, you will have moderate preachers from within those religions who can come out publicly and say, this is not what my religion stands for, these people are frauds. That's the benefit that you lose out on your side of the house. It means even if people are lying about whoever closing government thinks they're lying about, guess what? There are other people who can call out that lie. That's a benefit that goes away. But finally, on the provision of services, right? Look, here's the thing. In order to meaningfully advocate or make an advertisement for anything, you have to show a lot of good things that are associated with that, right? Which means that it is in the self-interest of religion to do a lot of good things like charity and have schools and all of these things. They go to Africa and provide aid there to the extent that they are now able to use that as an effective advertisement for the religion. If they don't have the opportunity to talk about all of these things in public, we're not sure if there exists any incentive for them to do all of the great things that they do, right? Because they never told us why they want to impose this flagrant violation on freedom of speech. But secondly, because they never engaged with the benefits in terms of moderation and services that we provided on our side of the house. They're very, very proud. So.
We thank the previous speaker very much and are happy to call upon the member of government.
Opening opposition wanted two things in this debate. First, they wanted people to be able to access religion to the best of their abilities and get as much out of that as possible. And second, they wanted a specific reason why public advocacy caused harm beyond simply ones who might try to selectively fee it out. Those are the 2 planks we're going to give you then specifically from closing government in extension. Before that, 2 pieces of rebuttal. The first thing one thing that opening opposition is quite concerned about is the idea of charity, right? That religious organizations do a lot of public outwork and good work simply for the fact that this is a form of public outreach to get more awareness. First of all, I would point out this is often incredibly coercive to lots of people, right? It explicitly forces people to buy in certain religious structures specifically to get money or like, or basic quality of life. I don't think it's just like morally obvious. But second of all, I think it actually works the other way, right? Currently, religious organizations can say, instead of doing good work and trying to convince people of the correctness of our religion by seeming like good moral actors, we can simply publicly advocate or buy media space or do things like that, right? I think in a world in which that is not an option available, it is far more likely to do a lot of this outreach stuff more substantially because of the specific fact that now the only way they can speak to people about that moral truth is by doing those good things in the world. Like, given they point out this is literally billions of dollars worth of good in the world, it's probably quite important for us. Second of all, I say it's hurtful to religious people to have things curtailed from you. First of all, if the problem problem is like broadcasting, you know, like stuff from like a mosque or whatever. We would say you could do an intelligent thing like, I don't know, maybe send a text message to all the Muslims in your local area when like the call to prayer would have occurred otherwise. Like, we think there are lots of ways that religious groups could get around this and speak to people who they need to speak to in ways that fulfill their obligations that aren't as obviously like public. But second of all, I think that often advocating a religion often does two things. Either says another religion is explicitly false, or it forces you to engage with very existential questions that can be psychologically quite damaging to people, right? One form of religious freedom is not having to repeatedly question whether you're going somewhere when you die, right? Not having to repeatedly litigate that question if that is something that you cannot perfectly answer for yourself, or the answer to which you are going to get is going to hurt you. One form of religious freedom is not having to constantly face that question in a public space. We think that's a freedom people should be advocated. We also don't think that if we're trading like religious harms between various people, that having to constantly hear that your prophet was a fraud is something you should have to force simply to allow other people the freedom to express their opinions. Two things in substantive ed. First of all, on the principle. Opening opposition's concern was as following, right? One of the standards they suggested we need to prove exists is that there's a power imbalance thing. I think, first of all, there is a very clear power imbalance, right? In lots of societies, it is far easier to publicly advocate for one form of religious belief than it is to advocate for another, right? If you want an example of this, try advocating Islam in a Western country where people will harass you in public if you try and do this. People will often call you like, you know, that your religion is wrong. They'll publicly attack you. In lots of countries that are religiously armed, you will physically be assaulted in the street if you try and advocate for religion. What that means is that by publicly allowing religious expression as a whole, what we do is actually very specific. It privileges religious forms of expression that happen to be in a position currently to be publicly advocatable in public space. That, if the standard of this debate is allowing people to choose the religion that best suits them, specifically hurts people who might want to be a Muslim rather than a Christian, right, in a country in the West. It hurts people who might want a specific form of religious belief that is nonetheless not accessible to them, precisely because public advocacy creates that power imbalance for people. Second of all, on the nature of the fact that certain forms of religious belief are often easier to advocate, right? For instance, I think if your religious belief tell you to publicly proselytize aggressively or tell you to like, you know, be more open about stuff, it's more easy to advocate that than say more a humble religious belief or something that might be quieter. We don't think we should allow a form of structure that prioritizes one particular kind of religious expression over another. Third of all, I think the fact that extremists can often publicly advocate things that turn off people from religion. So opening government's concern was that like people are hurt if they have to hear faith speech in some context. I think the problem goes far deeper than this. Works in the following way. I think, for instance, there might be lots of LGBT people, there might be lots of people who find the way the religion is often publicly advocated quite off-putting or simplistic or dogmatic, who nonetheless could gain immense value from actually having a religion or some form of religious belief. The problem is as follows, that in public discourse, a lot of the people that thank you who are publicly advocating offer extreme, or they say things that are distasteful or seem kind of crazy to various categories of people. The problem with that is as follows. If you are, say, LGBT and turned off religion as a whole because some people advocate that necessarily a consequence of that is that you go to hell, you're an evil person, you are never able to access the benefits of religion itself. That's the problem with public advocacy, right? So what it does is it privileges lots of things that could forever and a day turn off people from accessing religion instead of allowing them to specifically just enter into a church that would be more open to them and therefore get all the benefits of religious expression as opening opposition would. So that's why principally if we want access to religion, this is the thing we need more. Before that opening.
Why do you think people are so weak that their core beliefs are shaken at the point at which some person on the road calls their prophet a fraud? Why are they not more likely to engage or just move on saying that this person doesn't know what they're talking about?
Well, I think first of all, like it's often not engaged, right? You just feel an intense sense of enmity and hostility, which just makes you angry about the whole process. I think lots of people would be unsure, right? It's genuinely difficult to retain faith, especially if you're in a society where everyone tells you that your prophet is a lie. Or lots of like edgy teenagers in university tell you that God doesn't obviously exist really repeatedly and publicly in his face. Like public advocates about like bring down a church or bring back religious organization, which happens at a lot of universities. Second of all, on practical harms, I think this is incredibly important. We think that often public expression advocacy tears at society, right? And here is the specific, there are two reasons for this. First of all, because banning specific pieces of religion often arms religious groups against the state, right? In the absence of a blanket ban on religious expression, what you have to do as opening opposition was pick and choose specific elements of dogma that you say go beyond the level of legally acceptable, right? The problem with this is that the follows. First of all, it often makes religious groups feel as though they are being specifically attacked by the state, right? It makes those groups feel hostile and more likely either to like do things that are bad or be like, you know, be more hostile or like have problems in general. But also it privileges and empowers people who are extremists, right? Because they're able to say that we are the defenders of faith, right? We're the ones pushing back against a state that is actively trying to curtail your freedom of religious expression. When you have to pick and choose specific elements, right? Like an element of dogma and saying like you can't advocate stuff about the gays that specifically crosses the level of hate speech, that is something that hurts religions and makes them worse as a whole. Second of all, I think that often these things empower extremists, right? So as we pointed out, lots of religious extremists will do things like go and try and publicly advocate in a space that they know will have a hostile reaction to them, right? The reason they do this is to try and stir up conflict and cause damage within society and make people from their religious group be pissed off with the other group, right? We specifically stop this because we can ban that sort of speech and advocating in general. What that means is that religions are less likely to feel hostility towards each other because specific elements with it are trying specifically to generate that hostility, or we let people not feel as though every other religion in the world is against them. Last of all, on the adversarial nature thing, I think very often religious belief you have to do the following, right? You have to say like, you are going to hell specifically the thing you believe because you believe in the wrong God or some element you view as wrong. What that does is, again, it arms religious groups against each other, right? It makes many people, often in very divided societies, feel as though they cannot respect the basic existence of another category of people, right? And to be clear, we trade off that kind of stability of a state against other things all the time, because in the absence of state is able to function because two categories in your country are not trying to kill each other. Literally every other right that you could access falls apart. States need to prioritize that basic functionality and solidarity of the state over religious expression, because just because you very intensely feel a religious belief does not obviously mean it should drive literally every other practical consequence. If you want freedom of religious expression, the capacity to believe things that you want to believe, you need to support us. And if you care about practical considerations, you believe us. Vote opposing government.
We thank the previous speaker very much and are happy to call upon the member of opposition.
I'm going to do two things in this speech. First is to explain why choice and the thing that government bench most wanted for the side actually falls to our side of the house. Second of all, I'm going to analyze religious communities and their politics to explain why, pragmatically, their side of the house gets much worse for the worst forms of religion that both teams on that bench target. First, though, to clear up this right to religion thing. So, first of all, we think that there is generally a right to religion that is incredibly important. Unlike OO, we'll actually explain why that is. We think it's incredibly important to those individuals because that religion to that person is their constitutive attachment that tells them what the good life is for them. That's to say, their view of how it is that they exist in the world is governed by that religion, and as such is incredibly damaging to that person to say that simply doesn't matter. The important thing that OO also missed here is to say that in order for you to get access to that worldview, it is the case that in many religions, proselytizing is important. That is to say, it is not the end goal of proselytizing that more people get into your religion that is valuable, but that is the act of you participating in that itself. And as such, we think that when you point to, for example, certain sects of Christianity, when we point to Jehovah's Witnesses, you fundamentally deny them the importance of religion as a constitutive attachment if you deny them this. That is the particular thing that's bad about government's policy. Here's to weigh it. So we ultimately think that on their side of the house, the people that they say are targeted by people who are proselytizing are those people who are least likely to be affected or believe that proselytizing in the first place. You need only to look at all the examples that OG gave you about why it's untrue, about why these people are hostile to those beliefs in the first place, to know that those are the ones who are least likely to be affected if you say, for example, you were going to hell. But for the people for whom it is an essential constitutive attachment, to deny them that part of their identity is a much worse harm, which is why it is worse that we prevent that on their side of the house. Recognize that it's also true in the context of CG's arguments about why you are privileging some religions over others. The privileging means you are still denying those people that right. Now the rebuttal to CG. First of all, they say there's a power imbalance because you are privileging certain religions. In order for them to win this argument, they have to explain why banning wholesale all those religions would be any better. We ultimately think that in countries where there are, for example, majority religions, let's say Hinduism in India, if you simply ban the Muslims from being able to preach or practice the religion publicly, it's really likely that means that Hinduism gets much stronger. Those people feel much more marginalized from society because those people do not have a place in society for a dick of government. The other thing they say is that public discourse means that some people who might enjoy religion would be turned off from this because they see these preachers as crazy. One, their bench do not stand for an absolute light to religion. That's our side, so it's unclear why this is the biggest good for their side of the house. But second of all, we say that on our side of the house, there's more of an incentive to moderate. That's to say, on their side of the house, the strength of that religion is only based on the fact that certain individuals are so desperate that they themselves seek out that religion. That was the characterization that we got from OG about people who are in financial distress, for example. On our side of the house, that moderation is clearly different because all people who have most money, for example, moderate sects, are able to engage in the sort of public discourse. That means that not only do they exist, as OO points out, but they now have an incentive to moderate their discourse because they are trying to appeal to people who did not already believe that religion. The other thing that OG says is is that if you don't ban all religions, then you would have to necessarily pick and choose those religions, so that would be bad. One, it's clear which ones we are picking and choosing. Those are the ones that practice hate speech. That's clearly different from moderate religions, and I myself, like as a Christian, could recognize that. But second of all, we also say that on their side of the house, this problem is so much worse, because all you are doing is uniting moderate religions who are also under attack, must necessarily now adopt a siege mentality, because all of society has said you also do not belong in the public space, same as, for example, the Westboro Church, with people who are the most extreme. And as such, on their side of the house, the coalition of people who are extreme is much worse. The last thing they say is you would get into religious conflicts on their side of the house because religions would attack each other. They never explain why on their side of the house, like a Christian sect would have an incentive to go into an Islamic stronghold and try to preach the most there. Given that that is not the most likely pragmatic outcome, we think weighing this, it is not the most important impact in the debate. The core substantive, OG.
A prerequisite for religious freedom is making an informed, uninfluenced choice about which religion is the right one for you. How then can you be accessing that religious freedom if you are convinced to participate in a certain religion by a random church in the street?
Look, I already told you I'll answer this. This is the first point of the substantive, so I'm going to talk about this now. Why do we think that choice, this is directly answer your question, why do we think that choice is much better on our side of the house? So the first thing to recognize is that the only group that OG talked about are people, as they say, who walk on the street and then become convinced by some person to then adopt that religion. The other type of people that are also coerced on their side of the house are those people that were religious to begin with, something that they seem to have forsaken. We say that on your side of the house, when you criminalize people preaching in a public space, the people you are most likely to be criminalizing are those people who most fervently believed in those religions, and those people who were brought up from a young age to believe in that religion. And as such, the people who have the least ability to consent into that religion in the first place. As such, the weighing is quite clear. We think that on their side of the house, the people who are least coerced are the people who are walking by the street, because you do not have a reason to believe in Islam in the first place. But on our side of the house, the people who have been listening for all their lives to people, as they say, that control their souls and tell them you will go to hell otherwise, those are the people that you are hurting most by literally criminalizing their behavior. And as such, it is clear the coercion is much worse for those individuals in terms of degree. That's why we take that point. The other thing they say here is that they say some individuals will not otherwise freely choose this. Look, we think that the situation that they describe, where individuals would not otherwise freely choose this, is a situation in which individuals are so desperate as a result of a state failure. That is to say, we don't think it's wrong that when an individual is languishing in poverty, that they see an ad for a Catholic worker's house, and then they go to that house in order to get that provision of services. That's different from OO, because they just said those things exist. But as we explained, the reason why people are not able to freely choose is a special circumstance in which it is especially wrong to take away the ways in which you can ameliorate those people's conditions. That's exactly what their policy does. Cool. Now the second point, what do these communities look like? We think on their side of the house, extremism gets much worse, because it means that you incentivize sects to turn inwards. The reason why is because those sects must now necessarily adopt a siege mentality. They do not belong in public spaces the same as any other belief system in that society, and as such, they must necessarily perceive that their sect is under attack. We would point to, for example, the example of the Pennsylvania Mennonites, who created exclusive communities as a result of being banned from participation in public spaces. The types of things you see are preventing your children from interacting with other children. The types of things you see are preventing generally your community from interacting with the outside world. So ultimately, we think that what you get on their side of the house is a loss of two things. First of all, you get a loss of socialization. On our side of the house, we have more individuals who are interacting with people who do not share their beliefs. That's to say, the sort of public interaction we think is actually a moderating force. Because when you have individuals who challenge those beliefs, who might do so on the basis of a friendship even, you are entering into that interaction without the assumption that it's an assumption of hostility. That's exactly the sort of thing that they get. But second of all, we say that when you enter the public space and you have an incentive to try to get more people, you must necessarily moderate your belief system. That is because that is the only way that you can appeal to people in that religion. And if they say religions are so inflexible, that is clearly disproven by the fact that it's a huge spectrum of moderation, and we think we've incentivized them to push towards the middle. We point to, for example, the fact that the Pope has walked back on conservative Catholic statements, the fact that Reform Judaism exists, as examples of when theology can literally change interpretation in response to public pressure. Only on our side of the house do we introduce that incentive, because as we explained, that incentive is necessarily public. Only when you allow people to engage in society, do not make those politics worse. We think that's a pretty clear benefit. Really proud to oppose.
We thank the previous speaker very much, and I'm happy to call upon the government whip.
let's be clear what kind of world is created as a result of this policy. It is not a world where religion is shut out and destroyed from being a force within society. Rather, as John told you, it is a world where two things occur. Firstly, it's a world where individuals can engage with religion on a more equal basis, on a basis which doesn't allow extremists or zealots or fears of persecution to force them into one religious choice or indeed no religious choice. And secondly, it's a world which best preserves social stability, which is an important thing the government has to consider when making decisions about religious freedom. Because recognise, while it might not be the case that 100% of groups which engage in religious advocacy are extremists who do so less to win comfort and more to damage society, we think it's a huge harm within the debate. John gave you structural reasons about why extremists tend to be the most prominent. So 2 points of that. Firstly, who best preserves religious freedom? Secondly, who best preserves social stability? Before I do that, 4 points of rebuttal to what we just heard from the extension. Firstly, we hear that this policy is going to hurt individuals who have lived in very close religious communities because they now don't get a challenge. Look, I would love it if the people who live in closed religious communities see someone handing out a flyer for a different religion and immediately change their mind. I don't think that's particularly plausible. Why? Because I think that those people have likely been brought up in a world where they are indoctrinated to reject any challenge to their religious belief, and so will probably ignore the people who are engaged in preaching. Or worst case scenario is the scenario John talked about, where you've been brought up in a closed religious community, you see someone saying that Prophet Muhammad is a fraud, and you react with utter fury. Next, we hear, there is a danger that as a result of this, various religious sects are going to gain a siege mentality. They're going to shut themselves off from the outside world because they feel it's hostile to religion. We don't think they will necessarily view the outside world as hostile to religion, and we think actually comparatively closed sects are going to be more closed on their side of the house, right? Why? Because if I genuinely have raised my children in a reasonably closed religious sect, I don't want them going out into the public sphere where they may have their religious beliefs challenged, right? Because that risks them suffering. Or I may simply not want them to go out into the religious sphere where they see offensive religious material. Next, Henry says, well, in response to the need to proselytize, religions will moderate. He cites the Catholic Church is a good example anyway. I think that argument is uncomparative. The real reason that religious groups modernize and moderate is mainly to retain the existing followers they have rather than to necessarily expand their beliefs. But secondly, a desire to win followers still can have that change in religious practice, right? I can still be aware of doctrinal changes within the Catholic Church, even if the Catholic Church is prohibited from handing out flyers about its policy. Finally, two last things. One, he says that like picking and choosing what's the difference between acceptable religious advocacy and unacceptable religious advocacy is easy. I think he gives no response other than a sort of blind faith in the power and impartiality of officers of the state. We don't think that's going to be the case. He says next, this policy is going to unite religious extremists with moderates. Like now, the Westboro Baptist Church is going to form an alliance with the Episcopalians in the States. I think that's unlikely, but in terms of why, right, we think that all religions are likely to recognize that this is not an attack on religion specifically, but is more a measure designed to encourage social stability. Religious groups have a history, particularly in the Netherlands, of agreeing to curtail religious expression for the purposes of social stability. We think often the problem with the status quo is that without the state enforcing that ban, there's always the incentive to get around that, and there's always the ability for the most extreme part of religion to engage in religious advocacy for the purpose of undermining the status quo. Let's get into talking about religious freedom. One, I think it's important to recognise we've got very little challenge on the fact that it is legitimate for the state to curtail people's rights for the point of basic social stability. Because if there are religious rights, if the state descends, if the state cannot function, ultimately all other rights fail. Moreover, though, John gives you a number of reasons about why we uniquely protect religious freedom on our side of the house. Firstly, let's talk about power imbalances, right? I think OG are correct to say it's bad that you might be influenced to join a religion based on like an arbitrary factor that you bump into a Muslim rather than a Catholic when you're walking down the street. John's more takes this further, right? Because he points out that frequently the status quo excludes certain religions. Right? And this happens in a wide variety of countries. It happens with the Copts in Egypt, it happens with various religious minorities in Pakistan, it happens if you're a Muslim in many Western countries. that these groups simply don't have the ability to proselytize to the same extent. So what's the consequence of this? Note that. The consequence of this is that we are allowing a status quo in which individuals can't engage with certain religious beliefs because they don't see them. What's the comparative on our side of the house? The comparative is very clear. That individuals, when they want to, will choose to explore religion. Right? So they can go into things of their own accord, they can make their own decisions. Before I do, open.
Your extension said that regulating the problematic parts of religion is seen as hostile. Compare that to banning all forms of public religious speech. For God's sake, be comparative.
Yeah, I've explained that the problem with banning certain types of religious speech is that the types of religious speech that are banned are going to claim they are being unfairly targeted. It's much more easy to sell people a vision of secularism than to have the state drawing its own lines. That's what's more likely to cause social instability. Recognized religions frequently do agree to moderate their preaching for the sake of social instability. Right? It happened in the Netherlands for hundreds of years. It happens in other countries around the world. I think religions are capable of adapting and accepting this policy. Additionally, John points out, no, one, that we shouldn't prioritize religions which proselytize over religions which don't in terms of allowing people to choose. And finally, we say that individuals have a right to not have to constantly question whether their religious beliefs are true, and therefore we protect that. And finally, that the status quo means that, for instance, an LGBT person who might benefit from being Christian doesn't engage with that religion because they feel put off as a result of preaching. Let's talk now about social stability and practical consequences. What I want to note is that for many individuals, very provocative religious preaching has a purpose, and the purpose is to specifically incite hatred and violence. Right? So to specifically preach in such a provocative way that you will come under attack, that you will make, that you will get the Christian patrols in large parts of the West come under attack when you put them in majority Muslim areas, or that you will create an image of what a Christian means for those communities. Let's be clear about precisely how damaging that is. That can often be the thing which causes riots, right? Because people think, look at what this Christian is doing. It is so horrifically offensive. What do we do on our side of the house? We say that no form of religious expression is allowed in a public space. We still allow people to preach in private. We still allow people to inform others about their religion if they choose to come in to that religious institution. But we hinder the most extreme, the worst forces in society who want to tear it apart and divide it. It's for that reason, and the reason that we best protect religious freedom on our side of the house, that we are so proud to propose.
We thank the previous speaker very much and are happy to call upon the opposition witness.
I think it's amazing that on one government bench, we start with a line that religions are always wrong and irrational, and end with a facilitated right for government providing equal access to all religions. Like, guys, please reconcile yourselves. Two areas of debate. First, I'm going to talk about rights, specifically the right of people who believe in religion, because that will always outweigh people who don't even believe in the stuff that's being proselytized. And second of all, I'm going to talk about actual pragmatic outcomes, something that I think uniquely from closing opposition we talk about and wait for you. First area of the debate. So opening opposition tells you that there are some public displays of religion. They use examples like, the burqa or the call to prayer as examples of this that need to be maintained, but they get, unfortunately, a very strong challenge, which is just, the motion is only proselytization, so clearly that is not an example of what we're discussing in this round. So what does Henry do for you uniquely in this? He links to you not just demonstrations of faith like praying in public, but the actual proselytization, the saving of other people's souls as something that is integral to your faith and to an expression of faith. The fact that for Jehovah's Witness, many types of Christians, even people in Islam, trying to bring other people into your faith and creating the world of God on earth is a part of you accessing your salvation. Insofar as no team has actually argued against a right to religion at all, we think as a result, this is a very strong rights claim on the part of the people who believe in this religion that has to be weighed against. What are the countervailing rights claims we get from side government? So from OG, we hear vulnerable groups are told they're going to hell. Examples are members of the LGBTQ community, for example. A couple of reasons why these are less important. First of all, I just don't understand the portrayal of religious groups we get up and down the gov bench where they're like, yeah, we want to proselytize, right? Which means bringing people into your religion, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go tell people that they're going to hell, our religion hates them, and there's no place for a fundamental trait of ours in our religion. Sure, this happens in some cases, but that is a reason why you should be very skeptical of weighing those cases highly in this debate, because these religious groups have little to no incentive to ever do this in the first place. Second reason, because the people that they are saying this to don't actually believe that that's linked to their epistemic, or excuse me, metaphysical outcomes, and OG even tells you religion is unconvincing unless you already believe in it, then it doesn't impact them, right? It's equivalent to walking up to a gay person and saying, you're ugly. Like, yes, that sucks, but unless you believe that that's linked to your metaphysical outcome, it's not as significant as preventing somebody from doing something that they actually believe is integral for them going to heaven or hell. Two weighing arguments that I think solidly beat OG. Next, what do we hear? We hear from CG that you are essentially, or excuse me, one more thing from OG, you're coercing people into the religion. What is an example of the coercion, right? Like, you walk up to somebody proselytizing and they're like, we're gonna punch you in the face unless you sign this document that says you're a Christian. Like, I don't understand how this is actually coercive. But finally, Henry turns this argument, right? If somebody is so destitute because their basic rights aren't being provided to by the government, right, which is the actor instituting this policy, it is even less legitimate for this to be instituted if it actually offers them benefits, whether they be spiritual or material, also not actually responded to by opposing government. That is a principled reason why you cannot enact this policy. Finally, what do we hear from CG? We hear, you get religious riots, guys. Like, we finally get a warrant in the whip speech, which is just, you want to make yourself look like a victim, so you incite as much violence as possible. Like, again, unclear to me why this is the strategy of religions. Like, you're trying to get followers, so you go into a community that definitely you won't convert in order to get a bunch of your people killed in the hopes that eventually troops will come in, and somehow that gives you a savior narrative. Like, in the weighing calculus, this is such a small example of cases that it just doesn't matter, right? What is far more important is that when you never get people socialized to other religions on their side of the house through having to confront them in public spaces, public squares, it is far more likely that you get the divisive, identity-based politics that actually leads to conflict and actually leads to violence opening.
Don't you think it's actually highly likely that religions will tell queer people and women who are getting abortions that they will go to hell? Because that is precisely how they try and convert them.
No, I don't think so. It's unclear to me why a core identity of yourself being said that's linked to you going to hell is a convincing reason for you to join the religion. Maybe you advocate for policies against abortion, but that's not your tactic for proselytization. No. Great. So next, what CG tells us is that there's a power imbalance in religions, so you're artificially elevating some. So first of all, the only reason this matters is if they think you don't just have a right to practice religion, but you have a right to have a market of religions provided to you by the government on an equal basis, which is something they never substantiated. But even if you don't buy that, I think another response is the fact, think of the type of religions we're talking about. If you have a majority religion that's really powerful, it has political connections, it has money. Those are not necessarily the things that disproportionately empower it in the public square, right? We think this is a unique comparative advantage for small minority religions to choose niche communities where not everybody believes in the majority and actually get some socialization, some people to access that religion. It's the only opportunity that they have. They never explain why they would actually be shut out in this way. Final principled argument that goes unresponded to, you are criminalizing the action of the people who are most coerced by religions. If everything Gov says is true, and that a lot of times individuals don't have choices, we think those who have the least choice are the ones who are raised from birth by parents telling them, if you don't listen to your parishioner, excuse me, or your priest, you're going to go to hell. Those people's actions is being criminalized, which is abhorrent. Final area of the debate, the actual pragmatic outcomes. What we hear is that picking and choosing what religion you ban is going to lead to huge conflict. So first of all, we're not going to ban any religion, right? That's why this response doesn't make sense. We will ban specific hate speech, we will ban inciting violence, but we don't have to pick sects of religion to ban, so this harm is just non-existent. But second of all, a glib response that obviously moderates won't unite with extremists to overturn a law is clearly not enough engagement from the last whip speaker, right? It is the case that if a law literally prevents a moderate religion from getting followers, we think it's highly likely that they will unite with extremists, which is really damaging and gives those extreme sects a bigger position in society. If you think they're bad, don't do that. But But finally, we tell you that religion, this is the unique opportunity to actually shape theology when a religion has to advocate to a broad swath of the population in order to get followers, which is key for its support and strength. That changes things in Catholicism. That actually changes the theology, which in the long run gets the moderate and progressive change that they want to see on the Gov side of the house. Very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. Give another round of applause.